Hello, I'm very excited to be here, and I'm especially excited because my high school English teacher is here. Hi, Mrs. Block. And let me introduce myself. Dr. Thamar E Gindin. I build bridges between the Iranian and Israeli nations, or between Iran and the West, and open eyes on both sides to show that the other side is human, just like us. And this is my PR representative. Every Purim, Netanyahu gives me something for public relations. This Purim, he said that 2,500 years ago, a Persian tried to annihilate us, but did not succeed, and we will not let the mullahs do it again. I just want to remind you that Haman in the Book of Esther is described as Agagite, that is, of the descendants of Agag, the king of Amalek, which means he was of Semitic origins. And these are two Semitic nations. These are two Semitic nations that fight on a Persian background, but they're not, the person who tried to kill us was not Persian. We will get back to this later. What I want to start with is that the story of the Book of Esther is actually a story of girl power. And I will connect this, of course, to present day Iran. First of all, when Queen Vashti is called before the king, she refuses. She refused to come at the king's commandment by the chamberlains. How do you refuse the king? Actually, this has two questions in it. Why did she not want to come? Because the king did not call her with crown only. He asked her to come wearing a crown. I think that the other clothes were also insinuated or included. Why did she refuse to come to the king's banquet? And the other thing is, how did she dare refuse to come? The answer to the first question is that already in Achaemenid times, we will see what's Achaemenid times. It's the time of the Book of Esther. Women used to sit with the men at the banquets, eat and drink and everything. But when the men wanted to get drunk, they would send the women to their quarters and call the concubines, the dancers, the singers, the musicians, women musician, and noble women were not allowed because the men were drunk and did things. So when Ahasuerus, which we will identify in a moment, calls Vashti to the banquet when all the men are drunk and when he's drunk, it's actually an insult. And if she had come, he would have to banish her too. So it was actually an order that whether she refuses or not, she would have been banished. But how did she dare refuse? That's because Achaemenid women were very strong, very powerful in the king's court. We know that the wife of the historical king was so strong that she made her husband and later her son turn death sentences around, pardon people who were on death row, even though it wasn't customary, or sentence people to death, even though they promised them asylum or promised their safety. We know that they could do really bad things. We won't get too much into this because we have so much to say about the connection to present day Iran. The other thing we see is that when Esther gives a private feast to Haman and Ahasuerus, and then tells the king that Haman wants to annihilate all the Jews, Haman remained to make requests for his life to Esther, the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Which again, we know that queens were in this position to change decisions about life, death, torture, and so on. How does it reflect in Iranian history and in present day Iran? First of all, we know that Achaemenid women were very strong. We know that in Sasanian times, Achaemenid times are more or less biblical times, and the Sasanian times are about equivalent to the Talmudic times. Did they have real power, or did the women have to manipulate the men to get their way? Both. Sometimes it was manipulative. Sometimes it was using like a loophole. For example, Amestris, the wife, Xerxes' wife, used a day when the king is not allowed to refuse wishes and asked for a certain woman whom she wanted to torture, and he let her torture her. But in other times, it was just, exerting their power. It was not always manipulative. We know of both. And when I say we know, I mean from Greek historians, because the Persians themselves did not write about women at all. So we know that, I'll stop the sharing and I'll come back to the presentation later. I like seeing faces or being seen. Xerxes had one of his major commanders was Artemisia, who was the queen of Macedonia. She was the one who advised him not to go on his failed battles in the sea, because she knew that the Greeks are better in the sea than the Persians. But he didn't listen to her. He should have. We know that in Sasanian times, there were two empresses who ruled the entire Sasanian Empire in the 7th century. One of them was considered really good. The other one was too short-lived to be considered anything. From mythology, we have Gorda Farid. This is Gorda Farid. This is Sohrab, who is one of the strongest heroes in Iranian mythology. Only his father, Rostam, is stronger than him. But Gorda Farid was a worthy rival when they battled. And when her helmet fell off, he found out she was a woman. He fell in love with her. She told him he should come with her to her chambers and then close the door before he managed. What was the king's motive? If banishing would have been banished, whether she obeyed or no. Well, I don't know, but in an historical novel that I'm writing these days, I hope it would be ready for next Purim, what we think is that the king wanted to banish her, and he thought, what command can I give that I could banish her anyway? But we really don't know. And when we get to the historicity of the Book of Esther, ask me again, okay? Please remember to, because I might forget. We have poets. Poets in Iran are much more important than in the West. They get much more respect. So we have Parvine Etesami, who was born in the beginning of the 20th century. We have Forough Farrokhzad from the middle of the 20th century. Farrokhru Parsa was the first woman minister in Iran. She was the minister. She was a medical doctor. She was the minister of health and then education. She was sentenced to death after the revolution. And she said she's not afraid to die. She saw many people die as a doctor, but she is afraid to be enslaved or to not speak her truth. She was a Zoroastrian. That's the original religion of Iran. And women in Iran got the right to vote before women in Switzerland. And even after the revolution, this right was not denied. There were other things that were denied, but not the right to vote. Other things that were denied, for example, Shirin Ebadi, who was Iran's only Nobel Prize laureate, Peace Nobel Prize. She was a judge before the revolution. After the revolution, she became a secretary in the court because women could not be judges right after the revolution. and then she just quit her law career and became a politician and a human rights activist. She promoted many family laws and laws in favor of women and abused children, and got Nobel Prize for that. And she's also the only Nobel Prize laureate whose country took her prize and confiscated it. She lives in exile now. I love this picture of the car. The sign on the car says, in خودرو به علت بدحجابی راننده و به هنگام رانندگی، مسافران به هنگام رانندگی و آلودگی صوتی توقیف گردیده است. This car was stopped because the driver and the passengers were not wearing their hijab right. Hijab, you know, the covering that women have to wear in Islam. And voice pollution. Vocal pollution means they heard Western music. But until a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, in Saudi Arabia, you couldn't find such a sign because women were not allowed to drive, and women in Iran were always allowed to drive. There was no law against it ever. And women in Saudi Arabia would not take off their hijab, would not go out without men. So even that, so yes, this car is stopped because the driver doesn't wear her hijab right, but she does stand up for her right, and she does protest. Women voting in Tehran, you get your finger stained. And in one of the countryside villages. And this is Masumeh Ibtikar, the vice president who's voting. She's vice president for women and family affairs, but she is vice president. Iran also has a woman ambassador. The Islamic Republic, I'll distinguish between Iran and the Islamic Republic very shortly. Soccer in Iran is very popular, both men's soccer and women's soccer. There was a big fight of women to be allowed into stadiums. And in the World Cup, you could see more women from Iran than from any other country. I think maybe if they were allowed to stadiums, they wouldn't want it so much, but they do. This is the team before the revolution. This is the team after the revolution. They still play soccer. They just dress up differently. This is Nilufar Ardalan, the captain of the team a few years ago. And even though she's the captain of the team, when this kid went to elementary school, started first grade, it was the 23rd, I think, of September, a few years ago. And that was the first day of the Asia Cup of women's soccer. And she was not allowed to go because her husband, who was, they were separated, but not divorced yet, because women can't initiate divorce. And when a woman gets married in present day Iran, she gets a promise for money if she does get divorced, but her husband gets all the right to decide whether she leaves the country, whether she studies, and what works in what. He has all her life in his hand. And her husband, her separated husband, did not allow her to go to the World Cup. And that started a whole debate and started people talking about it, because before that, I was very surprised when I learned that there's the mahar, the marriage portion, the payment that the bride gets or is promised upon marriage, and she gives all her rights and all her decisions to her husband. I thought it was very weird, but I asked women who I know from the academy, women who are doctors, who are professors, and they didn't think it's odd. So Nilufar Dalan, Nilufar is a lotus flower, and gol is flower in Persian. So there was a very nice play on words that said that Nilufar made the most important gol flower, or goal as in soccer, for Iranian women. Mariam Mirzakhani, Iran's only field medal. Field medal is like Nobel Prize in mathematics. It's given only to mathematicians under 40 years of age. And Mariam Mirzakhani was not only the only Iranian to receive this medal, but also the only woman to receive this medal. Unfortunately, she passed away about 3 years after that from cancer, but she is a role model for Iranian women and girls all over. She studied until the end of her BA in Iran. Iran has a very good education system, especially for gifted children. The education system is separate for boys and girls, but girls get the same education as boys. It was like that in Achaemenid times too, 2,500 years ago. And gifted women are given the same education as gifted men. The reason for the brain drain is that after you finish your BA or MA or doctorate, if you don't have connections, you can't get a job. So she got a job abroad. And Masih Ali-Nejad, the leader of the hijab protest, I assume you've all seen women waving their hijabs or women taking photos without hijab. She started it. The hijab on a stick was something that Iranian women did on their own, but White Wednesdays, that every Wednesday, women who oppose the hijab wear white hijab. This way, they're not breaking the law, but they are making a statement. And her page, My Stealthy Freedoms, her pages and channels, My Stealthy Freedoms, feature women not wearing hijab in public places. The hijab protest in present-day Iran by women is the most stable and the longest protest of all. We see local protests here and there, or protests about short time protests about different issues, but the hijab protest has been going on for years, and this is thanks to this woman who does it all alone. I don't know where she sleeps, and I admire her. And last but not at all least, Nasrin Sotoudeh, human rights activist and lawyer. She spent some years in jail for representing political defendants. Of course, she couldn't get them out of jail because the legal system is not that, just. The justice system is not that just. But she did represent them, sometimes too successfully, which is why she found herself in prison too. And she went on a hunger strike a few years ago and almost died when her daughter was not allowed to leave the country because of her mother. So, and we see that Iranian women, even inside Iran, are very powerful. Outside Iran, of course, even more. And one of my Iranian men friends pointed out to me, it was I noticed it, but I couldn't put it in words, and he did it very nicely. He said that when immigrating, Iranian men who are used to getting everything, to be treated as kings and be given everything on a silver tray, now find themselves as immigrants with no advantage. And the women who are used to fighting for their rights and for their place in the family and the society are fighters, and they are the ones who hold the family together. It holds true for most families, not 100%, but I did see it many times. So now let's get to the Book of Esther itself. We saw that girl power goes from Achaemenid times all the way to our times, even though they have to fight for it. But now back to the Book of Esther. What the funniest thing about all the PR that Netanyahu is giving me is that he's treating it as a real historical event when the Persians tried to kill us. Well, is it? Chapter 1 of the Book of Esther is our anchor in reality. it starts, now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus who reigned from India even unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces. It's an anchor in reality because Ahasuerus, Hebrew Achashverosh, is the name of two real kings in the Achaemenid dynasty. Their old Persian name is Shayarsha. You see him here. And if you try to say Shayarsha, especially if you're Israeli, it's a little bit difficult. I think for Americans, it would also be difficult because of the ch, right? For Greeks, it was also difficult like that. But if you add an aleph, it's easier to pronounce. So Shayarsha became Achshayarsha, and then Y and V, Yud and Vav, can interchange in writing. And the vocalization was only a few centuries later, and so he became Ahasuerus. It's the name of two kings, but in the book of Esther, it must be the first one because the second one reigned only for 45 days. The first one reigned from 486 to 465 before the Common Era. And you see here where he's located in the family tree. The dynasty continues, but actually after Shayarsha or maybe Artaxerxes, it becomes not as bright. Cyrus the Great, Kurush, is here, and we will surely talk about him when we get to him. So this is the king. It's a real king. Did he reign from India to Ethiopia? This is the map of the Achaemenid Empire. It's in the days of Darius, Xerxes' father, but you see that it's in the southern borders are India. In the east, it's not present-day India, it's the Indus Valley, which got its name from Old Persian Hindush. And now it's the exonym, the external name of India. In India itself, they call themselves Bharat, not anything related to India. And in the southwest, it's Ethiopia, which is more or less present-day Sudan. So these are more or less the boundaries of the empire. I assume they didn't mention the northern borders because it was far from us. We need something that we know. So the boundaries are correct, but as you may notice, it's not exactly 127. It's between 30 and 40. Also, not only from this map, but also from the kings themselves who left us stone inscriptions and rock inscriptions where they enumerate their ancestors, so we know who's the father of whom, and they enumerate the states they rule over, the provinces. They always start Uta Parsa, Persia, Uta Mada, Media, Uta Huvja, this is Suziana is actually Elam. Yes, it's like my last name, which is coincidental. But they always mention Persia and Media first. So in the book of Esther, what time frame are we talking about? Is the question to me or to Bruria? Okay. I don't know if you're asking me or Bruria now. These are the boundaries of the empire. It's not 127, but 127 is a typological number. We have a lot of typological numbers in the book of Esther. The feast was in the 3rd year of his reign. Esther is chosen in the 7th year of his reign, and Haman, the whole story with Haman, is the 12th year of his reign. These are all typological numbers. And most typological numbers, or many of them, are a power of 2 minus 1. 3 is 4 minus 1, 7 is 8 minus 1, and 127 is 128 minus 1. And it's a known typological number also in other places. So if the scribe of the Book of Esther sometimes exaggerates. This is one of the exaggerations. The other anchor is in the second verse. We're not going verse by verse. I can, but I won't, because it would take, well, till Pesach at least. That in those days, when the king Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the castle. Okay, I want to go back a little bit, because I didn't mention that Shayarsha, it's written, but I didn't mention. In Hebrew, he's called Ahasuerus. In Greek, he's called Xerxes, which in English is pronounced Xerxes, because English can't pronounce Greek like the Greeks do. So we're talking about King Xerxes in Shushan, the castle. Shushan is present-day Shush in the province of Khuzestan in present-day Iran. Back then, it was the capital of Elam. Khuzestan is really the most miserable province of all. They have, this is long before the corona. They have air pollution. They have the worst droughts, and when there are floods, they have the worst floods. They have all sorts of air pollution. As you see here, it says Khuzestan has cancer and death. Khuzestan doesn't have air. Khuzestan doesn't have water. And here Thamar E, the leader, says Khuzestan has oil, which is also why it's so miserable. The Iran-Iraq war started in Khuzestan over oil and over passage of oil carriers in the river. In addition, Khuzestan has a very big Arab minority, and they have an underground called Al-Ahwaziyah. It's connected to the name Khuzestan. It's connected to the name Shushan. I'm not going to go into it now, even though I really want to, because our time frame does not allow. But they have terror attacks against civil and human and infrastructure targets, which of course the Iranian regime or the Iranians see as Saudi Arabian, the Saudis' hands in these things. The Al-Ahwaziyah wants Al-Ahwaz, which is Khuzestan, to be a separate state, an Arab state. They are in the Arab League. Al-Ahwaz is a separate country like Palestine. In textbooks in some Arab countries. And they say that all these terror attacks are financed and motivated by Saudi Arabia, because just like Palestine, most people don't want war, and they don't really care who's ruling them as long as they have an easy life. They can live and know what they're eating for dinner and breathe. This is another caricature of the terror in Ahwaz in Iran. And this is the city of Shush, present day Shush in Khuzestan, Iran. And here you can see the archaeological tell of Shush. And Shushan, the citadel, is here. In Hebrew, Bira, in present day Hebrew, means capital. But in those times, Birtu in Akkadian means castle. So most of the story is here in the castle, in this large, probably the feast was in this large construction called Apadana. In Hebrew, it's Bitan. In Old Persian, Apadana, maybe it's a PSM, phonosemantic matching, which takes something similar to the original name, to Apadana. But Bitan also has an etymology in Hebrew and an explanation that it's a sort of structure or construction. So most of the scroll, most of the Book of Esther takes place here in the Apadana or in the castle, in the Bira, but some of it takes place in the city. Actually, the city of Shushan is mentioned only twice in the Book of Esther. Now, if I usually ask the audience, I'll try to ask, okay? what two places do we see the city of Shushan? Is someone typing or should I answer? When Haman convinces the king to kill all the Jews, Ofarin ve'ha'ir Shushan navocha, the city of Shushan was embarrassed when Haman and the king decide to kill all the Jews, and ve'ha'ir Shushan tzahalav v'samecha, the city of Shushan rejoiced when the Jews are saved and everybody's happy at the end. So the city of Shushan is actually sort of a Greek chorus. Thank you, Leavol. Princess Leavol. And the Apadana that you see here in the tell is ruined, but we know from Persepolis, where there was a very similar structure, that there were these pillars. You have to imagine it with tall pillars. The whole feast, as mentioned in the Book of Esther, is very similar to what we know from Greek historians. Actually, the Bible tells us what the scribes wanted us to know. The Book of Esther might not be that historical. The rock inscriptions of the Achaemenid kings tell us what they wanted us to know, what they wanted us to remember. And Greek historians just want to give a bad name to the Persians. So we have all these unreliable sources, and we just have to cross information and try to understand what was there. So we have, there were these pillars with bovine heads with golden horns that were stolen a long time ago. And when you saw the tell, was there something that caught your eye besides the historical tell of Shush? Is there something that catches the eye here? The tower, right? It's called a pineapple dome, and this is it. And it was also on banknotes from the Shah's time. Here and here, and this is what it looks like now. This is the tomb of the prophet Daniel. So, Shush was the winter capital of the Achaemenid kings. It was the winter capital because it's the hottest place. It breaks temperature records every year. But also we have the prophet Daniel, who is buried here, and his tomb is a ziyarat gah, a pilgrimage site for both Muslims and Jews, more Muslims than Jews. And his bones bring luck and prosperity to the whole city. That's what Benjamin of Tudela said in the 12th century, at least. But it's still a pilgrimage site. I just wanted to show it because I assume most of us are Jewish here, and it's a cool thing to show. So Susa, Shushan, Shush was the winter capital because it was the hottest place. And if there are any Iranians in the audience, Jewish Iranians, they are probably very mad at me right now because I say that Shush is Shushan. While, according to Iranian tradition, Hamedan is Shushan. So let's go to Hamedan and see what's in there. Okay, we go from Shush to Hamedan through Bisotun, which we will go back to later. You see, it's more than 6 hours by car. So Shush was the winter capital. Hamedan was the summer capital because there the summer reaches 25 degrees centigrade max. And it's very pleasant in the summer, not pleasant at all in the winter. And Mordecai and Esther are even buried in Hamedan. So let's go to their graves. We take from the central roundabout, we can go to Philistine Cinema later. From Imam Khomeini Square, we take down Shariati Street, Aliyah Shariati Street. Second alley to the right, in front of the girls' school, we have the tomb of Esther and Mordecai right here. This is a video I took from YouTube that shows the tomb of Esther and Mordecai. And while you're looking at it, I think I insinuated it, but some think, and I'm afraid I'm among these some, because most scholars do think, that the Book of Esther is not historical, but rather a myth that justifies the holiday, and a myth that gives us power when we, poor Jews, are so oppressed that once we did triumph. Okay, I don't see who it is. Ruth. Ruth said that Shushan is mentioned in the Book of Esther 13 times and is mentioned in the Bible more times, right? One of them is in the Book of Daniel. He had a vision in Shushan, and yeah, a revenge fantasy novella. Thank you. I learned something new in every lecture, and this is, and today I learned revenge fantasy novella. Right, exactly. Between Israel and Amalek, as we mentioned in the beginning. I'm not going back into this, even though it's really interesting because we don't have enough time. But Laureate gave you the link to my book. It's all there. So it could be, I'll say why I say it's a myth and not only a legend, but why did we stop? So some say if it's a myth, who's buried here? And one of the assumptions, it's not sure at all, is that this is Shushandocht and her father. Shushandocht was the queen or the wife of King Yazdegerd I of the Sasanian dynasty around Talmudic times. And we know that she was the daughter of Resh Galuta, the head of the Jewish community of the time. So there was a king who was married to a Jewish girl. It was about 800 years after Ahasuerus, but who counts? So maybe it's Shushandocht and her father. We really, really don't know. But this place is a Ziyarat Gah, a place of pilgrimage where people come and pray, get pregnant, and everything. And I will take this to the end because I want to go on. No, how do I go on? Okay, this is another look at the tomb from the inside. And here on the top, we see Esther giving birth to Cyrus. If you remember, in the family tree we saw, Cyrus was the one of the Achaemenid kings, but the one who founded the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire. And then he was inherited by his sons, and then Darius the Great, and then Ahasuerus or Xerxes or Ahasuerus. So actually, I'm kind of spoiling for a story that I will tell in a few minutes, but I will. Esther here is giving birth to her husband's grandfather. Do you know of any illustrated, decorated Megillot Esther from the Iranian Jewish community? If so, is there anything distinctive about them? This is from 17th century. It's actually Adeshir Nameh, which is the story of the Book of Esther told in verse in the 14th century by Shaheen. But there's no, there aren't too many illustrated or decorated Megillot, and the ones that do exist are not very different from their Muslim contemporaries. I will get to the Iranian Jews celebrating Purim in a few minutes, because under Esther giving birth to Cyrus, her husband's maternal grandfather, we see a demonstration that took place in front of the tombs of Esther and Mordecai. Here, the sign says Ziyarat Gah Esther o Mordecai, place of pilgrimage of Esther and Mordecai. And the flag of Israel, which was burnt, of course, at the end, says Holocaust 77,000 Irani. You can understand, right? The Holocaust of 77,000 Iranians? Well, first of all, it wasn't 77,000. It was 75,810. I counted in chapter 9. But they were not all Iranians. I promised I will tell you once and for all the difference between Iran and Persia. You remember that Persia was one of the states, one of the provinces of the empire, but this was the province where the kings came from. And the empires of that time were called after the city-state that ruled them. So Babylonia, Babel, was a city. Assyria was a city. Persia was a city. Later, Rome was a city. So the empires are named after the central city where the government sits. But the kings themselves, when they enumerate the provinces they rule or the countries they rule, they say, Adam Shayafia Dahyunam Aryanamcha an Aryanamcha. I am the king of countries, Iranian or Aryan and non-Aryan. Aryanam is of the Aryans, and Aryanam, land of the Aryans, was over the years was contracted and became Iran. That's the meaning of the name Iran. The name Iran is documented before Parsa, because Zoroaster, the prophet, also talked about Aryanamcha, un-Aryanamcha, Iranians or Aryans and non-Aryans. So Persia is only one of the Iranian states. Media is also Aryan. Elam is not Aryan. And inside the country, it was always called Iran. The exonym was Persia. We talked about the exonym of India before. The exonym was Persia because the enemies of the Greeks were the Persians, the Persian Empire. But actually, they always called themselves Iran. In 1935, the Shah wanted to stress that we are closer to the West than to the Arabs or something. Iranians and Arabs hate each other. Or that we are closer to we are like the West. We are also Aryan. The Iranians and the Indians are the real Aryans. The Germans are not the real Aryans. That's also something I can't go into because of time constraints. But the Shah wanted Europe to call its country by its endonym, by the name the inhabitants call it, because Persia was the enemy of the West, and Iran is like the West. So when the Jews get permission to kill their enemies all over the empire, it means that they get permission to kill Aryanamcha and Aryanamcha, Iranians and non-Iranians alike. So not all of them were Iranians. Shut up. They also said that this is the first genocide in history. And we will get to an earlier genocide, not only an earlier genocide, but an earlier genocide of an Iranian nation in a second. They demanded to take the word Ziyaratgah off the sign. It was taken off the sign, and pictures of the tomb without the sign were also published. But my sources tell me that the words were returned to the sign. It wasn't taken off the list of heritage sites of Hamadan and of Iran, but it was done under the radar so as not to make the demonstrators mad again. And this, the calling Esther and Mordecai killers or murderers and calling the Purim story the Iranian Holocaust and saying that we Jews call Purim Jashne Irani Koshi, the holiday of killing the Iranians, is something that appears in blogs and posts and articles and YouTube videos every Purim. The anti-Semites make a lot of use of the story based on the only documentation of the events, which is in the Bible. It's not documented anywhere else. And a few verses in the Quran that say that Jews are liars. So they lied about that. We will tell you the correct story. And of course, Mordecai is the one who gives Ahasuerus the idea to give Vashti the illegal command that he would have had to banish her if she obeyed or if she refused. She refused, as we all remember. And then he makes Ahasuerus fall in love with Esther. And then they together plot against Haman, who really did nothing. He only wanted the Jews oppressed all the others in the empire. So he wanted to exile them from the empire. Such a thing does not exist. Okay, we do not exile people from an empire who will pay taxes. But that's the story they tell. And Jews in present day Iran celebrate Purim with very low profile. They do have a feast inside home. In descriptions and reports from before the revolution, some say that they never celebrated at all in the streets, and some say that they even burned puppets of Haman in the street. There was probably both practices, depends how anti-Semitic the environment was. But they do have shows, they do have theater shows of the story of Esther in the synagogue, not outside in the street, and the children get money and presents and everything. So this is the story. And Hamedan is not Shushan, but it was a capital of the Achaemenid Empire because it was the capital of Media. And the Achaemenid Empire was built on the Median Empire plus the Babylonian Empire. Cyrus conquered both. It was also the summer capital, as I said, of the Achaemenid kings. And it's even mentioned in the Bible, and it's very important in the Bible because when Cyrus the Great allowed the Jews to come back and build the temple in Israel, the nations around them wanted to join. When they were refused, they got mad. They sent letters of complaint to the king and say they don't have a permit, they don't have a license. You know, it started with all this paperwork, and the kings changed, and the kings didn't remember. And when Darius, it's Darius II, because the kings in the Book of Ezra are mentioned by their order. When Darius II, the king, made a decree, and search was made in the house of the archives where the treasures were laid up in Babylon, and there was found at Achmeta, the palace that is in the province of Media. So Achmeta, or Ekbatana in Latin, Hangmatana in Old Persian, is Hamedan. A roll and written was thus written a record. So Hamedan was a capital. It is mentioned in the Bible, and it's very important because the document that the Jews needed to complete building the temple was found there. But it's not Shush. It's not Shushan. Sorry. And if we go from the tomb of Esther and Mordecai to the north, we can see here the tale of Hangmatana or Ekbatana. And this is what we see there. Very, very different architecture from the Persian one that we saw in Susa and that we can also see in Persepolis. I'm looking at the time for a second. Okay, I won't tell you all the stories, but Cyrus the Great was the grandchild of the Median emperor by his daughter. We have some prophetic dreams, and the emperor tried to kill him. Of course, he couldn't. Cyrus came back and conquered the Median Empire in the north and the Babylonian Empire in the west, and united them under the name the Persian Empire. We will talk about Cyrus later. So it's an important city, really. It's just not Shushan. And if you remember, when we went there, we passed through Bisotun, and let's see what's in Bisotun. This is in Bisotun. It's not present day Iran, but it is Iran. And this stone inscription describes an earlier genocide. I'm not saying this is the first genocide, but it is an earlier genocide in Iranian history. And here, all the people who were killed were Iranian. They were Median. This is Darius the Great. And in the story he tells the story here. Okay, Fern, you can see the recording later because now it's getting interesting. Herodotus tells the story with more detail, so what I'll tell you is a mixture of both. Darius the Great, this is Darius. This is the imposter king Gaumata. Are you talking about this? Ran asked, what's the vulture? It's not a vulture. It's also this. This here, it's Ahura Mazda, the godhead of Zoroastrian religion. It became here, this is called Farvahar, Fravar, or Favar, which means a soul before and after it enters the body. And I would love to see the box you have at home. You can send me a picture on Facebook or something. I spell my name with TH as you see. So we're in the story, and Cyrus had two sons, Cambodia, who was the oldest son. He was the king after Cyrus, and he was crazy. He lived in Egypt because all Achaemenid kings were also pharaohs. They also ruled Egypt, as we saw in the map. But he was very crazy. And one of the craziest things he did was that he messed with other people's gods. You don't mess with other people's gods. He made a wound in the thigh of the Egyptian ox or bull. Is it ox or bull? I think it's a bull. An Egyptian god that's bull-shaped, right? Ox is without virility, I think. You can tell me in the comments if I'm mistaken. Anyway, he made a wound in the thigh of the Egyptian idol, and he did all sorts of other very, very bad and crazy things, which we don't have time for. But one night he had a dream, and in his dream, a man comes on a horse, a rider on a horse, and says, Bardia, that's the name of his brother who stayed in Susa, in Shush. Bardia is sitting on the throne and says, I'm the king now and everyone should obey me. Now, every king in his right mind, and more so a king without his right mind, who's out of his mind, would do the right thing now, right? Kill his brother. He sends his servant to kill his brother. Nobody knows about it because it's, it's following a dream, a prophetic dream, but a dream. Bardia is dead. And then Cambodia, in one of his journeys back to Susa. By the way, in the Bible, we have both Susa and Achmeta. In Greek sources, it's all Susa. There's no Persepolis. There's no Hangmatana. It's the capital is only Shush. So while he's in Syria, by the way, he was so paranoid that he asked his astrologers and soothsayers where he's going to die. And they say you're going to die in Ekbatana, in Hangmatana, which is Hamedan that we saw. They reach Syria, they camp in Syria, and a rider comes on a horse and says, Bardia is sitting on the throne and says, I'm the king, now everyone should obey me. Cambodia says, calls his servant, says, this man said that Bardia is sitting on the throne. And the servant says, not possible. I killed him with my own hands. Herodotus also said, I buried him in the ground with my own hands, but I don't believe that because Zoroastrians don't bury in the ground. It defiles the ground. Anyway, they start thinking who it could be, and the king remembers that when he left Susa, he left the castle in the hands of his most trusted servant, who was Magus, that's the singular of Magi, and that is a clergy, and a Median for Media. And this person has a brother who looks a lot like Bardia, not exactly, but a lot like Bardia. So he probably made his brother king. And then the Medians are trying to take the empire back. This puts the Persians in danger of losing their freedom. So Kambuja jumps on his horse, wants to speed back to Shushan, but alas, his sword mistakenly gets into his thigh in the exact same place where he made a wound in where he wounded the Egyptian idol. I told you, you don't mess with other people's gods. And these are the days before antibiotics were invented. So the wound gets he dies from the wound. The wound gets infected and he dies. And on his deathbed, he calls all the nobles of Persia and tells them the story. And then he dies. And then the nobles don't know if it's true, or does the king try to wreak havoc from the grave like he wreaked havoc in his life? And they don't know. And they go back to Persia and they still don't know. In Greek literature, Persia is in Susa. Susa is in Persia. They don't say go back to Elam or go back to Persepolis in Persia. Anyway, they go back. And then one of the nobles thinks about it and he says, you know what? The king is acting very weird. He doesn't go around in the city seeing other people like most Achaemenid kings used to go around the city and wave to the people. He doesn't call people to his presence like other Achaemenid kings. It's like isolating himself. That's odd. Luckily, this noble had a daughter who was married to the king. He couldn't talk to her directly because you can't just go into the harem. But his daughter was married to Kambuja and then went with the whole harem to the new king, whether it's the real Bardia or an imposter. He can't talk to her directly. He sits in the king's gate and he says and talks to her through a eunuch. And he says, my daughter, is the man you sleep with Bardia, son of Cyrus, or another person? And she says, I don't know. I didn't see him before I married him. So if he's not Bardia, I don't know who he is. Okay, that makes sense. So ask Hutausa, the daughter of Cyrus. She was married to her brother Kambuja. Then she went with all the harem to Bardia, or the imposter. She surely knows who her brother is. Now, if you like Herodotus, are appalled by the idea of a brother and sister getting married, it means you're not ancient Zoroastrians. Of course, present-day Zoroastrians don't marry their siblings, but in pre-Islamic times, not only did they marry their siblings, but it was the highest commandment and the best thing you could do in order to help good overcome evil in this world. And the proof is that the demons are so afraid of this union that they give your children all sorts of diseases. Anyway, he says, ask Hutausa, all the women live together. And he says, no, all the women don't live together. He separated us. He gave each of us a separate place in the palace. Okay, this gets him even more suspicious. He says, you know what? When your turn comes, because every girl has a turn, when he falls asleep, feel under his curls, because Bardia has ears, but Gaumata, the alleged imposter, doesn't have ears. Kambuja cut them off for some offense. So feel, and if he doesn't have ears, it means it's really an imposter. And the girl says, but you know that I'm putting myself in grave danger. If I feel under his curls and he doesn't have ears and he wakes up, he will understand what I'm trying to do and I'm doomed. He'll kill me for sure. And her father, still talking through eunuch, says, but my daughter, your nations, all the Persian freedom depends on you. If you don't act, the Medians will take over the Persians. You have to save your nation. She says, okay, if my father says, and if it's all up to me, I will risk my life and do it. And in the morning after her turn, she sends to her father and says, the man who sits on the throne, who she just slept with, has no ears. Dum, dum, dum. And then Hutana, that noble, gathers 6 other nobles. Together there's 7. Darius, the Achaemenid, is the last one to join them. And together they go into the palace and they kill the imposter and his brother and all the people around them and all the Medians. And then they run with their heads in the streets and call Persians to go out and kill Medians. This is the first genocide in Iranian history, and Medes are Iranian. That's one thing. The other thing is that there was a holiday named after this occasion. It was called Magupawan, protector of the Magi, and the most important, or the only custom we know of the holiday, is that clergy are not allowed to go out of their houses on this day, which is a little bit to the contrary. Like in the Purim principle is to the contrary. This is why we wear costumes and dress up as things that we wouldn't dress up in normal times and have to get as drunk as possible. You all know that. The even more interesting point about this whole story, I don't know if, I think you noticed the parallels with the Book of Esther. The girl risks her life, her nation is in danger, an old male relative is giving her orders from the gate, but she's the one who has to put herself in danger. And at the end, it's not the king who is dead, but in the Book of Esther, it's number 2. The king's right hand, and in this story, it's an imposter king. What year was this event meant to have taken place? It's not only what year, it's also what date. I'm sorry, I didn't silence my phone. It will go off on its own. It's 521 or 522 before the Common Era, on the 23rd of September, which was the 10th of the month of Bagayadi, which is parallel to the month of Tishrei. The 10th of Tishrei, what's that day? What's the 10th of Tishrei? Okay, you know it, right? It takes time to type. Yom Kippur, right? So it's Yom Kippur of 521 or 522 before the Common Era. So this is actually a New Year myth. In the New Year myth, before the New Year is either spring equinox, autumn equinox, or the longest night of the year. Before the New Year, we are in danger. The nation is in danger, or everyone. No sound? Okay, this is for Bruria because I'm not on mute. Everyone is in danger, or the nation, the freedom, something is in danger. And in order for order to be restored, the God has to die. So in some religions, ancient religions as well as Christianity, it's really the God that dies. Tammuz, Babylonian Tammuz, goes to the underworld and in Tammuz in July and goes up again in Tishrei. Jesus was sacrificed, or sacrificed himself in also the 13th of Nisan, which is also a new year. And here, but usually it wasn't the God who was sacrificed, but the king. The God's representative, which is the king, or a prophet like Imam Hussein of the Shiite Imam Hussein, was killed on the 10th day of Muharram, Ashura. If you know that holiday, it's a Memorial Day. They cry, they beat themselves with chains with metal chains. They cut their children. They bleed on the streets. They have like bleeding rallies. They wear costumes and have plays, theater dramas of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, who is the representative of God. In some other cultures, it was a temporary king, someone from death row who became king, who became king for 5 or 10 days, and then was executed after he enjoyed the king's harem and the king's kitchen. He was executed and the king was restored. The king used to sit in those days in the field wearing white. Hamelech basadeh is something that we sing, or religious Jews sing, in Elul, which is the month of Slichot. From the beginning of Elul until Yom Kippur, we are in danger. We have to say Slichis. Okay, Nathaniel asks if Hebrew and Persian calendars utilize the same solar lunar system. Today, no, but in ancient times, they both used the Assyrian method. We remain with the Assyrian calendar, and Persian calendar today is solar. Not any, no connection to the moon. In those days, it was lunisolar. So this is in many other cultures. In some cultures, for example, in the Persian New Year, which is March 20th, spring equinox, before the Persian New Year, there's a character called Haji Firuz who makes everyone happy and disappears with the New Year. And the origin of this costume was a temporary king. It was temporary king who was executed. Then it was a temporary king that made sure everyone can be happy in the holiday, and then became not king. And today it's just something like a clown. If you want a lecture about the Persian New Year, I'll be very happy to give it on March 20th or slightly before or after. Because the holiday is 13 days, and the 13th day, they all go out of their houses to have picnics in nature. I'll answer that just a second. I have some questions here, but on the 13th day, they go out and girls and boys can talk even in the most traditional societies. And most societies are traditional, which is also to the contrary. So all these holidays where the king becomes not king and someone else becomes king, they're all like, I call it orderly disorder, because we need to vent. It's like 5 days or 10 days that we can vent, and then everything goes back to normal. Okay, so we have a question of Asaf, who asks, how does the solar Persian calendar mix with the Islamic calendar? They don't mix. And Ran asks if Muslim holidays like Ramadan are celebrated or marked, because most Muslim holidays are sad, not happy. According to the Persian or Muslim lunar calendar, they are marked by the Islamic Muslim calendar. So everyone in their identity documents, they have their Persian birth date and their Islamic birth date. And Rohani said that his father forged his birth date. It's not really November 12th, it's December 9th. The 9th of day, December 30th, because he wanted his son to be born in a special day, and that was the Ashura in that year. But I think he made it day 9th. Day is the month, month of Capricorn, because he wanted it to be a special day for the Islamic Republic. It's a special day for the Islamic Republics with like rallies, pro-regime rallies it started after the 2009 protests. So in the New Year's holiday, there's a grave danger. There's the god or his representative or a fake representative, number 2 of the God's representative has to die. And then there's a lot of people that have to die. If you compare it to the story of Pesach, it's the same story. We're in danger and Pharaoh doesn't die, but all his hosts and all the firstborns die. And Pesach Seder, which we think is the most mainstream event of the Jewish calendar, is actually based on a structure like a Greek symposium. We act like Greeks in that day. The Mimuna. So many holidays not only Jewish, not only even Middle Eastern, also in Africa, we see that, also in Europe, in other places in Asia, that they have to die. And it's usually, it culminates on the 13th or 10th day of the year. Why is this important? Because, and now I love the connection I'm going to make. I hope you like it too, but just a second. First of all, we're going back to the Achaemenid family tree. Now you understand why after Cyrus, it's his two sons, and then it goes to Darius. Darius married Hutausa, Cyrus's daughter. Together they had Shayar Shah, who wasn't Darius's firstborn son, but he was his firstborn after he became king, and he was Cyrus's grandson. And we all need genetic justification. Another genetic justification is that Darius is the first one who calls the dynasty Achaemenid after Hachemanish, who's the father of the first common ancestor of himself and Cyrus. And this is the connection. I love this. Qasem Soleimani. Okay, you all remember him, General Soleimani of the Quds forces of the Islamic Republic. He was brutally and criminally assassinated on January 3rd, 2020. So first, January 3rd, 2020 is very close to the longest night of the year, right? We said that New Year's are either spring equinox or autumn equinox or longest night of the year. Not only that, but Iran was in grave danger. For years, they're under psychological war, they're under economic war. The sanctions drove it to severe poverty. More and more people are going through the garbage to find food. More and more people advertise their kidneys for sale on organ sales websites. I once interviewed one of the owners of such a website. There's a moral war because the West is trying to make our boys and girls wear Western clothes. So it is in grave danger, you have to admit. And the thing I like the most is that it's the 13th of the month. Like Friday the 13th, like Yud Gimel Be'adar, the 13th of Adar, which was the day of the great killing in the Book of Esther, the day Jews were supposed to be killed. It's the 13th of the month of day that starts in the longest night of the year. It's not God, it's not God's representative, who's Thamar E. It's number 2, because although he was not officially number 2, but he answered directly to Thamar E. Some say that Thamar E considered him a son. Big mayhem. There was a big mayhem. Many people got killed in his funeral. Even more people. There was a funeral tour. His body was carried from one city to another in Iraq and inside Iran until he was buried. And then even more blood when the Ukrainian plane was downed, when the IRGC tried to target American bases. There was, to the contrary, is that when he was killed, for the first few days, we saw demonstrations in favor of the regime and with love of Soleimani. You had to look in the right Telegram channels and Twitter accounts to see that people were happy to begin with. But the first big demonstrations we saw were pro-regime. After the downing the Ukrainian plane, and after it was, the people found out that they were lied to, and being lied to hurts your honor, which is much, much, much worse than hurting you physically. Then it became again demonstrations against the regime. But we saw people wearing colorful clothes, which means they're not professional demonstrators, but real demonstrators. Unfortunately, after that, things did go back to normal. And This year they didn't really celebrate it. They just marked it with ceremonies and speeches that threaten Israel, America, the West, and everyone. I don't know if there will be a holiday, but if there will, it's structured like a myth. He was a myth in his life, and he was killed like a myth. And now you also understand why I called the Book of Esther a myth and not only a legend. Yeah, the connection between Yom Purim, and my grandfather also used to say it. He used to say that in Purim, Jews dress up as Gentiles, and in Yom Kippur, Gentiles make believe they're Jews. We are way over our time. So, Tamar Buria, should I continue or should I wrap up? Because
it's really up to you. Maybe you should start wrapping up, but please, okay. Whatever you feel like.
Okay, so I'll just please continue if you have. I do have time. Okay, people ask me to continue, so I am. I don't mind. We will now take the car and go for 9.5 hours to Pasargad. Pasargad, Parsakadag, House of the Persians, is Cyrus's tomb. Cyrus the Great, remember, who set the Persians free from the Medians and then conquered Babylon. And he's the hero of all the Persians. This is Cyrus the Great, based on this. And this is the Cyrus Declaration. In the book of, in the Chronicles, in the Bible, he says that it's the God of the heavens and talks about returning the Jews to their land and building the Jewish temple. But in this clay cylinder found in Babylon, he actually says that Marduk made me king, made me emperor, and I thank Marduk, and I gave all the gods their people back, and I built, for all the gods, I built their houses again, because the previous Babylonian king destroyed all the temples. So he says, I'm giving all the gods their houses back. And I ask all the gods to go to Marduk in heaven and say good things about me. So I guess that the Jewish God is one of these gods who is urged to go to Marduk and say good things about him. Yes, Mordecai and Esther are Marduk and Ishtar. It's not the topic of this lecture, but if you want, maybe next year or something. This is another part of Pasargad, and this is Cyrus's tomb. And this is how Cyrus's tomb looked in 1971, when the Shah made a huge anniversary of 2,500 years to the Achaemenid Empire. He rounded it a little bit because 5 years later, he changed the calendar. Instead of starting in the Hijra of Muhammad, it started in Cyrus the Great. Did I hear? No, I didn't mention Tamar Bora, the dancer. I don't know her. When 5 years later the calendar was changed, it was 2,555. So not exactly. And yeah. And then they said that the Iranians said that the Shah promised to take Iran into the future. And here he took us 35 years into the future in one leap. Anyway, there was a big, huge festival with people coming from all over the world, world leaders. There were parades of people dressed up as the immortals. These are Achaemenids. These are Sasanians. These are the Qizilbash from the Safavid period who made Iran the greatest it ever was. Islamic Iran nowadays, do they celebrate Iranian holidays except Nowruz? I will remind me to answer that later. I want to talk about Cyrus Day. The answer is yes, but I can elaborate. This is the city of tents that was made especially for the occasion. And when I say tent, I mean this. This is how the tents looked from the inside. Or this. There were tons of money spilled on the event while the people in the street were hungry and poor. And the Shah tried to make them proud of their Iranian heritage, but he couldn't. They said, we're Muslim. What do we care about what was here 2,500 years ago? We're Muslim now. We don't care about Iranian identity and all. What the Shah wanted to do was weaken the clergy, but what he actually did was make them mad. And eventually, some people think that this event started the Iranian Revolution of 1979. There are a few dates that people mention. One is 1963, when the Shah started his reforms. One is 1971, when he held this spectacular event. One is 1975, when Iranians were allowed to make pilgrimage to Najaf, where Khomeini sat, and then they could bring back his tapes. What about the Megillah is either authentic and accurate or unauthentic and inaccurate? Okay, we will get to this right after this. This is the tomb of Cyrus the Great, about 4 years ago. Okay, so this is how it looked. This is how it looked on the 8th of Aban, which is Cyrus Day. It's parallel to the 3rd of Cheshvan, which in the year 539 before the Common Era was the day that Cyrus conquered Babylon, and actually the beginning of the Persian Empire. He became king 20 years before, but this is when he conquered Babylon and the empire started. And they celebrate this day every year, and they take days off work because they don't give them a day off. It's not a national holiday. And in the past few years, the regime is so afraid of this that it blocks the road. In the first 2 years, it was with the excuse that there's an exercise, a military exercise in the area, and then they don't even bother making up excuses, and people just stop at the barricades and have their ceremonies there. Before I continue, Islamic Iran nowadays celebrate Iranian holidays except Nowruz. Yes, the longest night of the year, which we mentioned, the night when the month of day starts, is called Shab Yalda, and it is also an Iranian holiday based on the Iranian calendar. And nationalists also try to revive other festivals, but mostly Nowruz and all the holidays around it, like Sizda Bedar, when they go out on picnics, and the days before, the Wednesday night before, where they jump over fires. What about the Megillah is either authentic and accurate or unauthentic and inaccurate? I will go back to this when we wrap up. But I wanted to show you how nowadays the only ones who could make the Shah's vision come true and make Iranians proud of their heritage and loathe Islam, who could make women want to take off their hijab, because when the Shah wanted women to take off their hijab, he had like non-chastity police who would take off hijabs from women in the street. Or when his father wanted to take hijab off women, he forbade women from going in the street without hijab. Women didn't go out in the street for 6 years. Most women, except those who were bold enough to go without hijab. The only ones who could make the Shah's dream come true, make Iranians think Western, be proud of their heritage and all that, is the Islamic Republic. Because when you force an Iranian to do something, when you impose, it's not only an Iranian, but Iranians are even more than other people. They don't like it. So what America should do is force Iran to make a nuclear bomb. Maybe not. If I'm Biden's advisor, I wouldn't advise that, but maybe as a joke in the lecture, it works. This, you saw Cyrus's tomb, which is like a neglected, cube, and the people give it its power. This is the shrine of Imam Khomeini. This is the tomb of Khomeini. And my sources in Iran tell me that in the Yortzeit of Khomeini, it's a day off, and it's either a day off so people can go there, or in government offices, they make people come and they give them buses, and no one can take a leave of absence because they have to go there. And people still take leaves of absences. And because it's a day off, people go to the north to celebrate and drink wine. Again, because it is imposed. Look at the splendor here and compare it to Cyrus's tomb there. But when they had elections for the parliament, they recruited Cyrus. He didn't, I don't know why they drew him like this, but it's supposed to be Cyrus, and he's calling people to come and vote in the elections for the parliament. Were there Jews or Judeans? Mordecai and Esther were from Binyamin. Is it possible that only Judeans were at risk, not Israelites from the other tribes? Is this a possibility? I think Israelites from the other tribes were already dispersed, and the exile that still stayed as a community was the Judeans, that is the Binyamin and Judah and their Levites. So I think it's not Israelites from the other tribes, according to the story. And by the way, Mordecai is the first time that the word Jew, Yehudi, is mentioned in the Bible, because he's from the kingdom of Judah. And from Persepolis, we'll go to Nachshirostam. From Pasargad, here's Persepolis, is Nachshirostam, because we're wrapping up. And I want to show you where they are now. So first, I will wrap up by saying that the Book of Esther is probably myth, ancient Middle Eastern New Year's myth converted to Judaism with names of gods from the Babylonian and Zoroastrian pantheon. Haman is a name from the Zoroastrian pantheon. But it's anchored in reality. The king's court, the king's name, the king's capital, the customs in the king's court are depicted very, very exactly. A complete series of your lectures is definitely warranted. Oh, why, thank you. I'd love to. The way that the king makes decisions when he's drunk and then only confirms them when he's sober. If he makes a decision sober, like in chapter 3 with Haman, they sit and drink to confirm it. The fact that Vashti refused to come, although a feast for women is not documented. The names all have meanings. The writer of the Book of Esther is very familiar with old Persian language, and I found at least 4 plays on words in the Book of Esther. Some of them on names of people, and some of them about other things. About the word that, for example. So it is rooted, it's anchored in reality, but the story itself is not documented anywhere else. And we would have expected that if the king gave a decree or had given a decree to annihilate a whole minority in his empire, and then given this minority permission to kill everyone else, I think, and they would have killed 75,000 people, who is like millions in present day numbers. The Greek historians wouldn't miss such an opportunity to badmouth their Xerxes, whom they really, really, really hate. The Babylonians don't mention it. Nobody else mentions it except the Book of Esther. And because it looks so much like a myth and so similar to the story of the accession of Darius to the throne, we must suspect that it's not really a historical story. And as an Iranist and a bridge builder between Israel and Iran, I like, and okay, also as a leftist, I like thinking that it's not true that Jews didn't kill so many people. But until we find the chronicles of the Persian kings, which we probably won't because there was a big fire in Susa in the days of Artaxerxes, the son of Xerxes, we can't really tell. Final chapter seems unusual and unnecessary unless money and taxes are at the heart of the story. Money and taxes are at the heart of the story. First 2 years, Xerxes goes and fights the Greeks. Okay, when Haman is in power, it's after the grave losses at the battles of Salamis and Thermopylae. War costs a lot of money. Banquets cost a lot of money. Greek historians who lived in the king's court say that the king fed 15,000 people a day. Hundreds of animals, of male animals, lost their lives every day in the king's court. It costs a fortune to feed all these people, and gathering all these virgins from all over the empire has its cost too. Keeping them, because he only tested one a night, it's a lot of money. And Haman promises him 10,000 shiklei kesef, shekels of silver, for his permission to annihilate the Jews. This is another, the king doesn't really say the money is given to you. It's a translation error, which we can talk about in my lecture next year, maybe, or something. But yes, money is in the heart of the story. Are there archaeological projects underway that may impact our interpretation of Shusha's Chronicle? Not that I know of. There are archaeological diggings all the time. There are more forgings than real diggings. But unless we find some evidence that really tells the story from a Persian point of view, paper was lost because there was this big fire. So unless there are new stone inscriptions or rock inscriptions found that describe such an event, I can't tell what archaeological projects can impact our interpretation, but I really don't know. So this is where they are now. This is Ahasuerus Xerxes, who is the hero of the Book of Esther. This is Darius the Great, his father. We also talked about him. This is Artaxerxes, the son of Ahasuerus, in whose time Susa was burnt, together with the Chronicles, maybe. And this is Darius II, in whose time the temple was built. Will they stop pursuing nukes? And what do you see? I don't know. I'm not a prophet, but once things happen, I will know exactly how to interpret it and how to explain it and say why it was very easy to predict. This is my book, the Book of Esther Unmasked. The lecture is based on very, very small parts of it. And the things I didn't say are also based on parts of it. And the book was done by crowdfunding. And one of the perks in the crowdfunding was something small from Iran. And the Iranian friend who I asked for something small from Iran brought me these matchboxes. And these matchboxes also summarize our lecture because, first of all, they talk about the Iranian pride and how Iranians hate Arabs. always Persian Gulf. And the three islands here that you probably haven't heard about are in a big dispute between Iran and the Emirates. No scripts from anywhere. Don't say anything. What are scripts from the East, meaning China, Afghanistan, India, are saying, if at all? Scripts, there is no mention of the story anywhere. Sorry, not in the East, not in the West, not in Iran. These matchboxes are called apadana. You remember the structure where the feast was held? It's apadana. It again shows Iranian pride in their heritage. And this is Xerxes, Ahasuerus. So you see how everything comes together. If you want to hear me more, you can listen to my podcasts. Enriched Uranium is mostly in Hebrew, but some episodes are in English. Iran Bekatan is only in Hebrew. It's off the air in Tel Aviv radio in 102 FM, but you can Google it up, and there's some Norwegian site that steals podcasts that still has it. My books are mostly in Hebrew: The Good, the Bad, and the World Journey to Pre-Islamic Iran, the Book of Esther Unmasked, which is also in English, and Heroes, Kings, and Dragons, Iranian Mythology, which we thought would be for all ages, but actually it's more for adults and young adults. It was supposed to be April 2nd, but because of the corona, we will postpone the capital tour of Iran. Right now you saw some capitals of Iran, but I'm giving a real capital tour in Iran. It won't be this Sizdah Bedar. It will be next year. I have to postpone it again because of the corona. If there's no peace until then, we will postpone it 1 year at a time until we go to Iran and have this holiday. Is there a difference between Hebrew and English editions? It's completely different. It's not a translation. It's an adaptation, because Hebrew and English readers have different backgrounds, both things I can assume they know and things that I can use for explanation. Many of my explanations are linguistic, and I use the mother tongue or the language of the book. Travelers in Iran with foreign passport, are they safe? And they're safe until, I wouldn't recommend going with a foreign passport, especially if you're Israeli, because if there's a scandal and they will look for a scapegoat, here you are, a spy. Also, people with double nationality, Iranian and other nationality, are even less safe than complete tourists. Just don't do it. Let's wait until there's peace, please. But L'Shana B'ayin Free Iran, and this is how you can get in touch with me or follow me. I'm more active on Facebook than on Twitter, and I would love to hear from you.
Did you actually mean a live tour or virtual tour? I wasn't clear on that.
Oh, I have a virtual tour in Iran already on my website. If you want to take, if you want to take the Zoom recorded tour that I gave in the beginning of the corona last year, but the event is a real live tour. We start by landing in Tehran, and I really plan it. I have it on my podcast on Iran Bekatan. I have a few episodes, and on my website I have 1 hour lectures recorded in Zoom. Which edition is more complete, Hebrew or English? They're both complete. They just assume different backgrounds. There's nothing of the mostly linguistic and cultural background, but they're both complete.
Well, I'm sure everyone would agree with me that tomorrow evening when we read Megillat Esther, for those of us who do that, everything is going to look different. You've added so many perspectives, information, understanding, and I think even your English teacher is pleased with you. So
that's the most important
thing. This lecture. Thank you everyone for joining us on this journey with Thamar through Iran, through Purim, and learning about this different culture. Thank you everyone from Ishkolot. I hope the Russian translation worked well for you. And I don't know, let us hope that this Purim is going to be the beginning of a new year also for all of us. And happy Purim, and everyone stay healthy. Thank you, Thamar. Thank you, everyone.
Whom to ask in Avichai for you to give a longer series? I think Thamar. Is there an available recording of the event? There will be.
There will be, and anyone who is signed up for this webinar will get a link to the recording once it's up. It might take a few days. We have a lot of programs going, and you can always check our website. The recordings are also posted there.
And I don't mind you posting it to YouTube for everyone.
Okay, great, great. So everyone will be able to enjoy.
Yes.
Purim Sameach.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks.